selection of a moderator, so I will open the floor to nominations.
I'll nominate John O'Brien.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second that.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. John.
Good morning. Exercise of democracy. I'll ask the clerk to read the call of the meeting.
It was printed on April 13. It says, "This is to warn voters and taxpayers of the Borough of Stonington that the annual Borough and Budget meeting will be held on April 21, 2001 at 8:30 a.m. at the Borough Hall to approve the minutes of last year's meeting, to hear the warden's report, to act on a budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2002, to consider a Highway Department capital improvement program, to select trustees for the Waldron Fund, and to consider such other business as may come before the meeting."
Thank you. First item of business would be the approval of the minutes of last year's meeting, dated April 15, 2000, and I'll entertain such a motion.
So moved.
Second. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
There's also minutes from the meeting of August 26, 2000. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. I'll then call upon the warden for his report.
If you'll bear with me, my computer was down this week, so we have two separate yellow pads of notes here. I'll try to be brief. In the spring of 1801, a group of citizens like ourselves gathered to begin the experiment of self-government in the newly established borough of Stonington. In a few weeks, on May 6th, we'll observe the 200th anniversary of that first borough meeting with a reception and a lecture given by Mary Thatcher on life in the borough in 1801. That's on Sunday, May 6th. I hope you'll all attend. Over the past 2 centuries, the borough has experienced many changes, moving from agriculture to boat building, growing into a major transportation hub in the 19th century, and then into manufacturing, and always fishing. Our population has ebbed and flowed like the tides, but we have remained a diverse and sometimes stubbornly independent people, proud of this community and determined to maintain our unique status as a self-governing borough. And not just any borough, but the first and the oldest, or the most experienced, if you prefer. We have a proud tradition founded on the idea of citizen service. Throughout 200 years, citizens like yourselves have offered their time and talent in service to this community, either in elected positions or as volunteers on the borough's boards and commissions. That spirit of service continues today, and without it, we could not have borough government. So may I ask those of you who do serve on any board or commission or in any elected office to please stand and be recognized. Now, come on, you know who you are. Thank you. Thank you. It's been an exciting and exceptionally busy year for the borough and for the Board of Ward and Burgesses. Since our last meeting in April, we've seen the passage of the Harbor Management Plan, the preliminary application of the Clearview project, the construction and opening of the new inn at Stonington, the purchase of the new firehouse property, the appointment of a building committee, and the selection, or near selection, of a finalist for our firehouse, architect that is. I could go on at length about the extraordinary commitment and dedication that all of the individuals who've been recognized have offered, but allow me to briefly summarize some of the highlights of the past year. Shortly after last year's annual meeting, the citizens of the town and borough overwhelmingly passed a harbor management plan to better utilize this most precious natural resource. In the months since then, the Harbor Management Commission has worked diligently to organize and identify dozens of moorings that will soon be allocated to an extraordinarily patient waiting list of boaters eager to enjoy this beautiful harbor. In addition, the plan gives the Commission authority to review waterfront development and provide comment to state and local agencies, which they will be doing with regard to the Clearview project and the proposed Mohegan aquaculture business. I want to commend Chairman Charlie Starrow and the entire commission for their work. Now to my other pad. Planning and Zoning Commission has been extremely busy in the Herculean task of reviewing and commenting on the preliminary plans for what is the largest project ever undertaken in the borough. Former Chairwoman Betty Richards is to be commended for shepherding the process along, as are all the commission members who have given hundreds of hours of their time in this enormous effort. In addition, the Plan of Conservation and Development has been updated, and a rewriting of the borough's subdivision regulations has been undertaken, not to mention last year's rewriting of the regs. Now the torch is passed to Peter Hewitt, who will have the task of seeing the project through the formal approval process. We thank you all for your work, your ongoing work. I'd like to take note of some special, also the ZBA, pardon me, Jane, I'm sorry, the Quiet Committee.
I'm serious.
The Zoning Board of
You should leave.
The Zoning Board of Appeals does their quiet work dealing with the applications, and Jane has done a masterful job as chairman there.
That's better.
Thank you. I had you further down in my notes. With regard to special committees, I'd like to particularly note the Bicentennial Committee this year, chaired by Elsa Cole, with a host of citizen volunteers. I know I'm going to forget somebody, but I know Ned and Tom and Rick Unruh and Janice Lamb, who we want to congratulate in absentia. She's up with a new baby in Providence, along with Herbie, their new baby girl, and Tertius Decay, and who else? Please. Judy DuPont. How could I forget Judy? Are to be commended for their efforts producing an exceptional bicentennial calendar, which has now sold enough to return our seed money, and so every one sold now is profit. So get the word out. They've also worked to come up with a series of events for this bicentennial year, including the scheduled lecture I mentioned on Sunday, May 6th. They're planning a slightly expanded 4th of July observance, and we're considering a late summer program which would include fireworks if all goes well. So some exciting stuff for the Bicentennial Committee. Meanwhile, the Building Committee, chaired by Herbie Lamb and co-chaired by Eileen Jackham, our Fire Commissioner, has had help from Peter Schallenberger, Bob Abramson, Jeff Hoadley, and also from a citizen volunteer, Inger Elliott. In an exhaustive search for architects, we sent out over 50 invitations for requests for credentials, interviewed 11 finalists, or had 11 interviewees. There are 4 finalists, and I want to remind you all to come next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. when we'll hear from those 4 finalists for their plans on concepts for our borough firehouse, after which public comment will be received in writing, and then a selection will be made by the Board of Ward and Burgesses.
Can you tell us who the names are of the 4
Yes, from memory. A small firm called P2, Stephen McAllister, architect from Plainville, Connecticut. 2 larger firms that have done a lot of firehouses, Roche, there are 3 named firms. Noise Boat is one, and the other is Roche.
Schoenberger.
Oh, pardon me, Schoenberger. Yes, you're right.
But you're right, the other one was very close.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. This is from memory. And of course, Philip Johnson. So we're excited about the 4 finalists. I'd like to also note the Signage Committee has been at work as well. We reviewed their report from last year and have done additional posting of signs, including the new stop sign at Main Street. No booing from the back row there. We've had, I think, good results from that with increased safety on the cross street and a calming of the traffic. And I'd like to thank the public for their input with that. We had a public input and police meeting, and it came to some successful recommendations for speeding problems and traffic calming in town. We've had a series of public information sessions, including that one, the firehouse project and land acquisition. We've had a session on the Mohegan aquaculture proposal, a borough facilities report recently with Phil Hare, and of course the P&Z had a series of meetings in connection with the Clearview project, all of which benefited extremely from the public input. Now, I'd like to just quickly go over what's been happening in each of the departments. First, I'd like to introduce to many of you who know Margaret Hewitt, our Commissioner of Public Affairs. Margaret?
Hi.
Margaret came in generously and offered her service to the community upon the retirement of Sheila Lyons, who stepped down after moving out of the borough. Sheila we saw recently at a Lenten luncheon, looking very tanned and healthy and happy, having returned from 3 months in Mexico. So, what are we doing wrong? But Margaret stepped in wonderfully and has been handling the borough calendar and public events schedule. She also keeps us posted on various public meetings and attends COG meetings as the borough's alternate in my place, which so far has consisted mostly of vulcanized chicken lunches and various breakfast meetings, but I appreciate your goings. Our fire commissioner, Eileen Jackham, has been hard at work primarily on the building committee as we work on this firehouse project. I'd also like to commend Chief Jeff Hoadley, who I don't think is here, and our Assistant Chief Paul Wisniewski, and all of our dedicated volunteers. Eileen provided me with a brief report for Jeff with regard to activity in the firehouse this year. There were 94 alarms in the year 2000, a relatively quiet year. 44 were in the borough, 28 in the fire district, 9 at Monpausic Point, 4 at Lord's Point, and 9 were mutual aid calls. So we see the bulk of our calls continue to be in the borough. I'd like to point out, too, that in addition to being the best trained and most dedicated department in the area, they also happen to be the best looking. And they have the trophy to prove it. This year, the fire department won 2 trophies. One for Best in Parade at the annual Hoxie, actually at the 100th anniversary of the Hoxie Fire Department, and one for overall appearance. And it's thanks. The trophy is about this high and will be in a new display case when we build the new firehouse. But they thank you for your contribution to their new Class A uniforms, and it really does make them look Class A. Soon we'll hope to provide a firehouse that is as great in function and appearance as the men and women who serve in it. I've already taken the opportunity to remind you of the meeting next week, so we'll pass along. With just many thanks to Eileen Jackham, who also worked very hard this year in passing a tax abatement ordinance with Jeff Hoadley. We worked very long and diligently. Eileen was our point person on that, getting a tax abatement for fire volunteers within the borough. It's a great, I think, incentive to them as well as a reward, and it allows for $500 worth of tax relief to any borough firefighter who qualifies. And we've managed to include in this year's budget an increase in our length of service awards, which is a sort of a retirement program for long-term service in the fire department. In streets, Street Commissioner Herbie Lamb, who I mentioned is absent today with a new child, continues to maintain our borough streets. This year, we'll have the reconstruction of Hancock Street to begin shortly this spring, and later, hopefully, in accordance with the firehouse project, we'll do the north half of Main Street, grading and resurfacing there. Hope to get some savings out of combining those two projects. Also, as building commissioner, Herbie has seen to the maintenance of our borough buildings and is chairing the building committee, as I mentioned, with regard to the firehouse project. Commissioner of Sidewalks, Elisa Starro, is now in her 7th term. After 14 years of service, Elisa is retiring from the board this year, but I want to give her a warm round of applause. Years of service as both sanitation commissioner and sidewalk commissioner, and also as water commissioner. She's seen to the proper maintenance of our borough sidewalks, and this year has, I don't even know if we know the number, there's an extraordinary number of sidewalks that have been repaired under borough ordinances with Elisa's tireless efforts. She also serves as water commissioner and liaison to Connecticut American Water Company when the occasional pipe bursts and our citizens need notification. Lastly, she's our sanitation commissioner, has served in that capacity for a number of years, overseeing the transition to town pickup and sorting out the occasional problems with pickup schedules and recycling. Parks and trees and rights of way. Our other perhaps longest serving Burgess, is that possible? Ellie Casey, I think it's Commissioner Ellie Casey continues her labor of love, caring for and seeing to the upkeep of our beautiful trees and public spaces, working with Susan and now Tom Oliverio, who I want to welcome aboard. As many of you knew Victor, but Tom is our new assistant to Susan in the Highway Department, and Ellie works with them and Herbie in keeping everything looking so great. She also serves as our police commissioner and has been keeping the lines of communication open between town police and the borough, and helping to work on some of these parking and speeding problems primarily. Also, Ellie has arranged for the new town's speed limit flashing sign, which we now, the town, through your tax dollars, has purchased our own, so we don't have to queue up for Groton's any longer, and we'll be having that in town this spring to start cracking down on next week, perhaps, on borough speeders. Elsa Cole, who is, as I mentioned, in addition to being our Bicentennial Committee chairman, is our streetlight commissioner, engaged in what President Kennedy once referred to as the long twilight struggle. This time not with the communists, but with the CL&P, although we sometimes wonder what the difference is. In an effort to gain approval for uniform historic light fixtures and an appropriate color and intensity for light for the borough streets. $21,000 has been budgeted this year to begin testing and phasing in of the program if we can ever get movement from CL&P. Have I forgotten any Burgesses? Okay, now I'd like to commend our clerk treasurer, Mayada Wadsworth, who has served also for 14 years, Mayada? 16. All right, our longest serving. Mayada hates this, but I'm just going to briefly thank her now because she'll get greater thanks at a future public meeting. But, so brace yourself. But she has served as the borough's clerk treasurer now for 16 years and has done an extraordinary job keeping everything going. You would not believe the volume of things that she deals with on a daily basis, and has really transformed the job from a rather casual kind of handling of borough government. No offense to earlier days, but the state legislature and state statutes have really added a lot of required reporting, and Mayada has kept up with that and computerized our borough accounting and has just done a wonderful job, and I want to thank her for all her help. I'd like to recognize our videographer and tax collector, Tom Crimmins, in the back. Who's done just a superb job of filming these public meetings and increasing our tax collection to record high levels. I think we're at 98% this year.
97 right now.
Okay, well, but he's done a great job also updating the tax collection methods and notification, providing very great graphic reports and really helping to make it, I think, a lot more understandable to borough citizens. And who else have we?
Winnie,
of course. Winnie, always working and quietly just staying out of the public sight. Winnie LaGrua, who will be retiring this year after serving in both the tax collector and tax assessor's position. And she's just done a wonderful job all these many years for us. And I'd like to just get her a copy of that tape. And for my part, I've worked to try to coordinate these efforts and to work with our representatives on the state and local level. And I'd like to actually recognize our state representative, Diana Urban, who's here. Thank you very much, Diana's been a great help and partner in trying to see to various borough undertakings, and I've recently asked her for all kinds of help with money issues on the firehouse, on our foundry building, if we go forward with that, and also to work on various harbor-related matters as the Mohegans advance their proposals for aquaculture. She's been very helpful. we've also been working hard to alleviate parking issues, and I've arranged for a temporary agreement with Monsanto for use of the lot through the summer months, as they've agreed that the overflow of parking will become an issue, and since they're not going to be using the lot, they've agreed to open it if the board and the borough agrees to reinstate the insurance rider we had in place. We've spoken with Rob Simmons' office to request grant money for the Borough Foundry and for the firehouse, and asked for public hearings on our Mohegan agriculture project, and also working with the USDA and the town to discuss firehouse funding options. Sorry, this is where it got very sketchy noted. So that's what we've been up to for the past year, and I'd just like to say I think it's really an exciting time. To borrow a page or two from Ned's most recent editorial, there's an awful lot going on here, and it's really exciting to see with the completion of the new inn, with the anticipated Monsanto project, with the firehouse project coming up this year. We hope to be under construction if with any luck in the fall. There's just a great deal of excitement in the borough. I think new businesses, new energy here, and I think it's fitting that it's our 200th anniversary and that we can celebrate it in a year of such a promise. So thank you all for coming.
Next item is to act on a budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2002. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to adopt the budget for the fiscal year. Is there discussion?
I'd just like to say, we do have an overhead projector here today with the budget on sheets, if it would be helpful to anyone to review it. We're happy to do that. I don't want to prolong the meeting, but I'm happy to go through it if there's any questions.
Chair will entertain discussion of the budget. If there is none.
Actually, I just something to fill time. The extra mill rate is, if you could just explain how that's being allocated so people understand what that went for.
Absolutely. The mill rate that was approved by borough voters last year in anticipation of the firehouse project was put in place primarily as a means of increasing our borrowing authority. We were limited by state statute on the amount of borrowing we could do. As most of you recall, you agreed to the 1 mil increase to increase the level of borrowing that would be authorized for the firehouse project. This year, the full 100% of that 1 mil increase, it's about $125,000, is being set aside for the firehouse project for either debt service on the project once the borrowing has taken place in June or thereafter, or into the building fund. So 100% of the increase in the mill rate has gone to the firehouse project.
And does that show in here as a separate fund?
It does, I believe, in several columns.
You mentioned the 3 places.
$90,000 for debt service. That's done in anticipation of the loan coming somewhat into the next fiscal year. So we'll pay at least $90,000. We put $30,000 in the, I think it's a special projects line item, and that's in anticipation of having to have some architectural work and planning consulting work to actually bring the project to a public vote. We don't know how much that's going to cost. Some of that will come out of that fund. The rest of it will go back into debt service, and then we've got 5,000 or so in the, what is it?
Added to what was already going.
Oh, added to what's already going into the building fund. So it's broken down that way. Thank you, Tom.
Just one quick question. I have a little booklet, maybe it's on the sheets, that says actual estimated 2001 proposed. How does that estimated column compare with the budgeted column for the year?
You mean with what was budgeted last year?
Mm-hmm.
We're spending less. We'd have to, I did make up a comparison in my worksheets, but that's now a month and a half old, and we'd have to go back and look at last year's budget, which is available downstairs, but
just general,
generally we are getting more income and spending less than we expected.
Good, thank you.
If there's no further discussion, we'll proceed to vote, and I'll ask all those in favor of adopting the budget to raise their hand. Those opposed? The ayes have it. The budget is adopted. And we'll move on to consider a highway department capital improvement program. Is there a motion with respect to that?
Move to approve.
Second.
Is there discussion?
Discussion?
I have a question.
Yes,
Is there any consideration of burying utility lines as part of these 5 projects?
Yeah, I should remind everyone that the 5-year project is a state requirement. Municipalities are required to put forward a 5-year program. We do that anticipating these kinds of things. That is not a hard and fast commitment to those very things. We may have changes over the next 5 years. The real one is the coming year. There has been an undergrounding committee of private citizens working with members of the board who've, I'm trying to remember who sits on that for us.
Elsa does, I do sometimes.
Okay, Elsa, and also Ferguson, getting input from them. Exploring undergrounding possibilities. I've also talked with Diana Urban about that and seeing if there is funding there. It's something that's definitely in our mind to do. The cost is still prohibitive. We haven't gotten very far in actually putting in place the undergrounding project. I think it's regarded as something that we would certainly like to do if the funding can be made available. And I'm told by others, however, that should the time come to do it, it does involve, essentially it could involve, after the fact, the digging of a single trench that would run along sort of one side of each road, and you could install it after the fact if that became necessary. It certainly would be helpful if we could do it, for example, in an area where we have a series of streets that are going to be undergrounded, and we're going to keep that in mind as we press for.
One other short question in Kirby's absence. Is anything being done about water streets, how diving, I guess, with an enormous number of new potholes?
Right.
Are they just going to be routine?
That is the plan for the time being. We know there's going to be an enormous amount of construction activity, maybe not so far south, but it is part of the long-term plan to do all of the streets in the Point area in sort of succession, as you can see. So that'll be probably plugged into maybe the Trumbull Street project might include some.
Did you patch some of it this year?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, believe me, I rumble across those every day.
Jeff?
Question about the state requirement to have a 5-year plan. Is that only for highway improvements, or is it generally all capital improvements?
My understanding is highway.
This particular thing is in order to qualify for the local capital improvement program and get those funds. That's all this is.
I understand, but is the requirement to have a plan that encompasses all proposed capital improvements or just highways?
This particular is this particular is just highways. I'm not sure whether we could include other types of capital improvements in that program. It's always, our highways have more than covered the amount of money we get from them is $1,500 or so.
Right.
So we've never tried to branch out because it doesn't even cover, I mean, it's so tiny compared with what we need to do.
Sure. And I also know that last year, or this current year, for some reason, you received almost $8,500.
It accumulates from year to year. If you don't spend it one year, it's saved up in a separate account for you. And when we decide to apply for it, we get it. And this, I'm not sure why we've not applied for it in the past with this Main Street project. But we decided, yes, I do know why. We'd reached the level of the state limit on savings, and since that money isn't included as an asset of ours, if it's left with the state, we left it there.
So we wouldn't go up.
Yes, now that our limit has increased, and with the taxes, our debt limit has increased, we decided it's time to get that money. So when Hancock Street money is spent, we'll apply for the LoCIP money.
So you were talking about a capital improvement program, and In an ideal world, the plan of development is coordinated with any capital improvement program, and we do have some goals in our master plan that discusses capital improvements, and I would urge in the future that this be a joint effort by the Board of Warden and Burgesses and the planning arm of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I think we should look to see what is required under the state statutes and make certain that we do that in accordance with the statutes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the Highway Department Capital Improvement Program, raise your hand, please. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Next item of business is to select trustees for the Waldron Fund. Do we have a nomination?
I'd like to say we did hear from Don Bromley yesterday, and he said that he had, I guess he had originally consented to continue, but then decided that he really would not like to continue as a trustee of the Waldron Fund. So this meeting needs to find at least one new trustee.
And the current trustees are Donald, Eleanor Casey, and Elizabeth Coteau.
I did receive a letter requesting consideration as a trustee, so I would put a nomination if that is appropriate. The name of Rose Rappo as a trustee.
Is there a second?
Second.
So there are nominated Rose Rappo, Eleanor Casey, and Elizabeth Coteau. Is there any discussion on the nominations?
The other two are included in your nomination?
I will do that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Is there any other business to come before the meeting? Yes, Diane.
I thought I might sort of bring you up to date on the latest things that are going on in Hartford that are of particular interest to the borough. In particular, the Mohegan project, the aquaculture project, with Andy and I have been working on and staying in contact. The project was a lot more extensive than anybody anticipated. I think if you've seen the public notice, there are 1,400 acres, and of that, 243 would be put into aquaculture, and it involves the water column, not just the bottom. So there'd be hanging baskets that are 700 pounds each, which would be in navigable waters. So once it came to our attention that this was indeed the project, I think everybody was really excited at first that aquaculture is an appropriate activity, and it was going to be sort of small scale. But once we saw the extent of the project, we started to get in touch with the local fishermen, recreational boaters, local officials, and got in touch with the Army Corps of Engineers and said we felt we needed a public hearing, that we thought the project was way too extensive. So I'm happy to say to you that unofficially, the last thing I heard in Hartford is that the Mohegans are going to withdraw the application and come with a pilot project, a small pilot project, to see how it works, to see how it impacts the community. And the legislature's Environment Committee, which I sit on, will be establishing a working group to take a look at the public trust issue that we're being faced with here, because there's going to have to be a balance between commercial activities and, you know, the people who want to utilize this tremendous resource. This will also take into account, I don't know if you stayed abreast of the issue of the trans-energy cable that was going to go through oyster beds across the Long Island Sound, which was, and that's another issue that I worked very hard on, that was effectively squashed. All that energy was going to Long Island. Connecticut would have no benefit from that cable, aside from the fact that our oyster beds would have been, in essence, destroyed. That issue will be coming up again, and that is another issue that the legislature will be studying. For those of you who are enamored of the Avery Point Lighthouse. That bonding did go through. So we're going to be looking at saving the Avery Point Lighthouse. We also have bonded a small town assistance fund, which I will be talking to your warden about to see if we can get some money for the borough there. And I was interested in the street lights. I have sponsored legislation for a study of light pollution, which is in essence what's happening to our night skies. And we don't need to have that happening. We can look at different ways of lighting. A lot of our lighting is lost, or it's just, it's not efficient. It's going up into the sky, and in essence, destroying any view of the stars. And there, of course, wildlife impacts and all kinds of other impacts, but the one that people see themselves is the night skies are disappearing. And that's along with a ton of other legislation, which I hope you guys feel comfortable calling me if there are things that you're concerned about. One warning, the budget came out, the governor's budget came out, and the Democrat-controlled Appropriations Committee just issued their budget, which don't spend the money yet, okay? We're trying to figure out where it's going to come from. So the fund begins in Hartford as the balance between what the governor has suggested and the Appropriations Committee, which the budget that they came up with is wonderful. The only problem is I don't know where we're going to get the money to give it all to everybody. There's got to be some choices made, and that budget from appropriations involves deficit spending. And when we're in a surplus, it's scary if you start to deficit spend when you already have a surplus. So the battles will begin. And as I said, don't spend the money yet because there's going to be fights over it. Anyway, it's great to be here. You guys have such a warm town meeting. I would love to say.
Not all of it is.
So thank you.
I had a question. Who in the end has final say on a project in Stonington Harbor dealing with aquaculture?
Right now, this is very interesting because there's a part of this that I'm worried about. The legislature in 1999 streamlined the aquaculture approach because they felt that the Department of Environmental Protection was getting in the way too many times. That we wanted to, apparently there was a push to get aquaculture going. So it was taken away from the Department of Environmental Protection and given solely to the Department of Agriculture. So that was the problem when this particular application came up, which was huge. Nobody expected this. They all expected like a mom and pop. They were not ready for this. Department of Agriculture was really not equipped to adequately look at this. Fortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers has to come in on these particular applications. So that's where it is right now, with the Army Corps of Engineers. And that's who all the statements are going to, and that's who I'm dealing with.
They're the final authority in such a
Final authority at this point. DEP only can say something about coastal zone management, and that's got to do with structures. But we are now tinkering, and that's why the study group, do we need to bring DEP back into the loop on these particular aquaculture issues?
I have a question. You mentioned that a pilot study or a pilot program might be studied. It has been requested that there be a public meeting. Would there be a public meeting for that pilot program?
Well, if everybody feels, personally, yes, I would like it. I would love that we have that public meeting because I think that this particular application just got out of control. We did not catch the size of this application until 2 weeks ago. It was actually Arthur Medeiros who called me.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I have no affiliation with the Mohegans, nothing at all, but they made a presentation here about 6 months ago, and they told us everything, all the facts, the full detail, the full scope of the project. It was not a secret, it's not been exaggerated or blown out of proportion now. We heard everything that they were going to do, and anybody that came to that public meeting could have heard the same thing.
Well, I think the Mohegans really have, I'm not faulting the Mohegans. I think it was people not actually realizing the size of the project. and
It
the
was there for
recreational
everybody to hear
learners.
from the very beginning.
They made it sound so simple and easy that I belittled it. Do you see what I mean? I think we all did. So I think, oh,
But all the details were presented.
I know, but
Now to say that they somehow pulled the wool over our eyes is something I don't think is true.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I'm
Well, I
saying
think
that
you
there
were
was.
inferring that you
that
said
there's-
it was only 2 weeks ago before anybody knew what the facts were.
Oh, no, I meant it was only 2 weeks ago that somebody got in touch with me about the size of the project. I just thought the project was a small aquaculture project and everybody supported it until the fishermen got in touch with me and said it's much bigger than we anticipated. And I understand what you're saying. If they, they gave the information, apparently people didn't pay attention
There was a lot of people here.
to the extent of it.
I'd like to say something. The Harbor Management Commission on this coming Monday will be discussing the project at 7:30 at the town hall.
Excellent.
Everyone wants to come.
And the public notice is available in the libraries. If you take a look at the maps, they show you exactly what they intend to do and exactly where it's going to be. And I agree with you, 100%, they did not hide it. It's one of those issues where people, I guess, decided aquaculture, everybody seems to be really supportive of aquaculture. So I think that they said aquaculture, this is good, and it took a while before people actually got the application, looked at it and said, oh, whoops, this is a little big to start out with. So, no, the Mohegans have been, believe me, and I, from North Stonington, and have dealt with the Mashantuckets, which is a little bit different. They do not communicate with us. The Mohegans communicate with the community. They communicate with us up in Hartford. They have always been very upfront.
I'd just like to add there will be a representative there from the Mohegan tribe.
Which doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, that's how they've been. And, I have been very happy with the way that they've approached everything.
Are there any further subjects to come before the meeting? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, yes, trustee.
democracy starts at the grassroots. And if there are people like this board, like those on the commissions, and so many people here, tending these roots to make sure society at the base level works, then our republic will always flourish.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
So adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, John.
It's very rich here.
Hi.
It's nice that you're so connected.
Well,